Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure to see you. I want to thank you for inviting me. Thank all of you for coming to this talk. And I'm so excited to speak to you tonight about one of my major loves and passions, which a lot of people think it's weird, but you're here so you don't. You get to hear all about rattlesnakes. And I would like to tonight to tell you a tale about what I call, and actually I didn't coin it, as you'll see, next generation natural history. And I want to do that by starting a little bit with my history, okay? So as Chris said, I started out as an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. I ended up actually merging my love of the English literature and science by writing my senior thesis on the representation of the serpent in the Bible, which is pretty cool, I thought. But I joined the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology, which, as many of you may know, is a major natural history institution. So I fell in love with natural history, basically the basics of what animals do. What do they eat? When do they eat them? When do they reproduce? All sorts of things like that. And when I got to my PhD, I was told, in the style of the time, that's not good enough. You need to start studying something that is more modern. Like physiology is what I ended up studying at Arizona State University. And then now that I'm a faculty member at Cal Poly, I get to go back and say, well, actually, it is very much good enough and very important for us to be studying the natural history of these organisms, because it's our departure from understanding the natural history of these organisms that's causing a lot of the problems that we're experiencing today. And in particular, what we're going to be talking about today is how my involvement for the past 17 years at an engineering and technology university with tons of people who can build really cool things all around me has led to what we call this next generation natural history. The idea that we can still study what animals eat, who eats them, when they reproduce, what they're doing, but using new technology that's allowing us to make discoveries that we've never been able to make before. Okay, so this is sort of my Venn diagram of this next generation natural history, right? Where I'm combining my love for natural history with physiological training that I've had over the years, and now more recently, resources that I have available to myself in engineering and technology, right? So that's my version of next generation natural history. But like I said, I didn't come up with it. There was a recent paper that any of you who are interested in this, I would encourage you to read, this idea of the rapid rise of next generation natural history. And I identified three really important things that this can do. One of these is kind of leveraging this for conservation and management. So for a little while, when I was a professor at Cal Poly, we did standard physiological research. And then before too long, my students wouldn't have it anymore. They said, Emily, I want to study conservation. I want to do something that's important, that matters for that animal. And so I really think that this next generation natural history has these conservation applications that can bring students into the fold to do things that matter in the real world. The next thing is that while we're doing it, it can actually go outside of our little research bubble, and it can help to connect more people with nature. So as you'll see today, a theme of what we're doing now is doing research while also making sure that it's accessible in a very real way to other people, people who are not researchers. And then of course, third, for me, it always comes back to the students. I'm a proud faculty member of the California State University system, where it's all about the students. And so I get to do my research firmly with them in mind, and my job is focused on student mentoring. So all of this is kind of the backbone of this concept of next generation natural history. And that paper showed you some examples of some of the things that people are doing nowadays, right? So there's binoculars, radio collars, camera stations, and of course things like molecular biology, recordings. All of these things that may have begun in the distant past have really started to take off in terms of what we can do with those things now. So I'm just going to pick a few of those to talk with you about tonight. I do study lizards quite a bit, but mostly it's rattlesnakes. It always comes back to these fellows. They're just amazing animals. They live literally over every inch of California that has not been overtaken by urban development. From the coast, this animal is on the beach in San Luis Obispo, up over our beautiful Sierra Nevada, all through our deserts and beyond. They're a truly inspirational organism for many, many, many reasons, and they're also one of the most, as you all know, maligned organisms, the most unfairly maligned organisms out there. This was the organism that made me fall in love with biology, and I'm going to tell you some stories tonight about what I've discovered with my love affair with rattlesnakes through the years. and as well as how I'm now trying to desperately, not brainwash so much, but just spread the love to other people too. Okay, so what makes a wonderful study organism? You know, when I was in graduate school, we talked about how there's the right study organism for every scientific question. But for me, I've always thought about what inspires people, what inspires me, what inspires my students, what can inspire the public. And for me, inspiration was a combination of two things. Access. So I love rattlesnakes because if I'm studying them, I can go out and they're curled up above ground. I can see them, I can watch them. If I'm doing a physiology study and I need a blood sample, I can pick one up, not with my hands. I can pick one up and I can get a blood sample. They're not hiding underground like other snakes are. They're not flying away to a distant area like a bird. They are accessible. And secondly, innovation. So adding innovation in there was really important to me because I started to notice something right away. I'd walk up, I'd find a rattlesnake, and the poor rattlesnakes were terrified of me, and down they would go into a burrow, right? They'd start rattling. They started acting differently. So I realized that if I was truly going to start understanding what they did, I needed to be innovative about how I watched them. So you're getting some foreshadowing into tonight's conversation of the sort of studies we've done. Okay. Why is this all important? This is all important because, unfortunately, we didn't learn our lesson in the 1980s when we started to notice the global decline of amphibians, and reptiles are hot on their heels now. As many as a third of all reptile species around the planet are imperiled due to things like climate change, over-harvest, habitat destruction, and many, many more things. And what I would like to say to all of you is that one of the problems is the way that reptiles are portrayed to most people. So how do most people see them? Most people don't walk up and see a rattlesnake in the wild. Most people see them like this, okay? And I call this the Animal Planet effect. I don't know about y'all, but when Animal Planet first came out, it was great. It had quality programming, and then it just went off the deep end. And now we have stuff like this all the time, which is making people fear wildlife. It's making wildlife other. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is my efforts to counter the Animal Planet effect. And then, as you're going to see tonight too, people have been doing really terrible things to reptiles, especially reptiles, since long before Animal Planet started to exacerbate those things. So this is a photo that won major awards a few years ago. It's called the Wall of Shame, which is a paper wall at the annual Sweetwater Rattlesnake Roundup, which, by the way, starts tomorrow in Sweetwater, Texas, where the children who go are encouraged to dip their hands in the pools of blood from the decapitated snakes and put them on the wall and sign their names next to them. And in my personal opinion, this is, at the very least, this is causing a greater rift between our youth and nature and wildlife. And at the very worst is causing us to have a generation of sociopaths on our hands in the future. Okay, so here's an outline of the stories I'm going to tell you about rattlesnakes tonight. I'm going to tell you about my pathway through next generation natural history a la body temperature logging. So that's where I started. Logging body temperature in these snakes is something that is a technological challenge that has changed over the years. And it's been a fascinating conundrum that I'm going to tell you some stories about. And then we're going to move on after that into how we use those body temperatures that we were able to log using new technology to be able to study the energy budgets, meaning how much food does a rattlesnake need to eat to do what it needs to do, and how might that be affected by climate change. And I guarantee that during this part of the talk, you're going to hear a bit of trivia that is probably the one thing you'll remember from tonight if you don't remember anything else. Fun trivia. So you can start thinking about that trivia now, which is how many adult ground squirrels does an adult rattlesnake need to eat in a year to maintain itself, to not lose any weight? So just think on it, don't yell anything out yet. I'll ask you for it later. How many big ground squirrels does an adult rattlesnake need to eat per year just to not lose any weight? So coming up later. And then we're going to be talking about how I have been using what we've been doing, like I said already, to kind of try to combat this Animal Planet effect or nature deficit disorder, which is something that we use a lot to talk about the disconnect between people and wildlife. And then, of course, always contributing with my students in our own way to the data that we have, to the literature on how climate change is impacting reptiles. So let's start with body temperature logging. All right, so I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite technological advances in the 20th century. It's this beautiful thing called an I button. All right. So that I button in the center is, of course, dramatically oversized. As you're going to see in a couple minutes, it's about the size of a nickel. And I buttons are temperature data loggers that you can program to log temperature however often you want. And they were not made for zoology. They were made to be able to put into the back of a truck that was shipping produce across the country, so that when it got to its destination, you could show that it never got too hot to spoil the produce. And of course, the first thing that us physiologists said when we saw these miniature data loggers, we said we could put it inside animals too. So we realized that we can do something we never did before. We could actually coat this in a non-toxic coating. And when we put a radio transmitter inside a rattlesnake, we can stick an I button with it. And then a year later, we can pull them out and we have a full record of body temperatures day and night. Well, why was this important? This was important because previous to this, if you wanted to understand the body temperatures of these beautiful animals, I'm going to be sneaking in really cool photographs the whole time, none of which are by me, by the way. I'm sneaking these in. If you wanted to know the body temperature of these animals, you would have to grab it, and you would have to do something called the grab and jab, where you would put something up its butt, a little thermometer up its butt. They don't like that, first of all. Or there were temperature-sensitive radio transmitters where you would go out and you would be there for like 1 minute and you would log the temperature because it beeps in proportion to how hot it is. So you would get one data point for every time you went out there, but that doesn't represent what it was doing at night or in the morning or whatever, okay? So with what I was able to do, and I wasn't the first one to do this, but I basically came to graduate school in the generation that was starting all of this, was we surgically implanted radio transmitters into their body cavities. And then alongside that, there goes the little I button. So that's what it looks like. The little suture on there is because it gets attached to the rib so it doesn't float around the body cavity. I was lucky enough to go to graduate school with a professor, a major advisor who was both a PhD and a doctor of veterinary medicine. So I was able to learn how to do these surgeries. And rattlesnakes are so resilient. We would do these surgeries and the next day the snake is curled up outside a rodent burrow hunting. They're just amazing animals. And then we put the animal out, and then it starts to just collect our data for us. And so now you can get a look about how big those I buttons are. Really, really small for these big snakes. Snake goes about its business, and now instead of having, I guess in the past, maybe I would go out and I would get one sample a day when I was out there. Now I've got samples day and night. Why is this important to know? This is important because we're interested in how climate change are impacting these animals. Their body temperatures are directly related to the temperatures in the environment. And if we're going out there just once a day, we have no way of knowing how it's impacted throughout the rest of the days. So this resulted in a paper that, you know, honestly, of all my papers, it hasn't been cited very much, but it's one of, in my opinion, my most important papers I ever published with my undergraduate student and my professor at Arizona State. And what we did was we compared what would happen if we only went out once a day. So we like randomly chose one of the samples a day to our continuous sampling. How did it change our knowledge of the thermal biology? In other words, we were the first ones to say, well, all these other papers went out just once a day and they said this is the temperatures of the snakes. What happens if we have the continuous data? And we were able to show this. So this is the active season of the western diamondback rattlesnake in Arizona. And this is just mean monthly body temperature. And what I want you to see is that the semi-continuous mean, that's the I button data, right? That's right along here in the middle. If we were to instead be like most biologists, where we just went out during the day, because biologists don't like to go out there at night, then we would overestimate that a lot because we would only get a daytime sample when the snake was more warm. If we only went out at night, it would be lower, and so on. So in other words, we were able to show that using this technology of data logging, it was incredibly important that we get these data throughout the day. Why am I telling you about these I buttons? Because they're going to play a role now in the next set of data that I'm going to show you. So the thing that we did next was, over the years, my students would be doing work on rattlesnakes. They would be studying how translocating rattlesnakes out of people's yards impacts their physiology. They would be looking at how stress affects their venom, all kinds of physiological grab bags. But every time we put radio transmitters in them, we also put an I button in them, even if we weren't studying the temperature for that. So before I knew it, I had amassed 10 years worth of data at 4 different sites of Southern Pacific rattlesnake body temperatures. So I had a student come in then, and she took those data and she published a paper that, contrary to the last one, did make quite a splash in biology, where she took those data and she was able to construct these energy budgets of these snakes. This one came out just last year, okay? So thermal ecology and baseline energetic requirements of these large-bodied ectotherms suggest resilience to climate change. Okay, what is that in English? It is that using those I button data for the past 10 years, we were able to say, what is the body temperature of the snakes now? What's it going to be in the future due to climate change? And we were able to show that rattlesnakes are going to do really well with climate change. Now, of course, it depends on where you are. We're in coastal California. Pretty soon I'll convince you, though, that we had some hot sites. Maybe the ones that are in Phoenix, Arizona might be a little closer to their peak, so maybe they won't do as well. It's complicated. But we hear so many stories about animals who are going to go downhill due to climate change, and we found the exact opposite. And it was because I had just been putting those I buttons in those snakes every year for no reason. We found a reason later on. All right, so let me tell you the story of this study and how it happened. We had 4 different field sites that we had studied over the 10 years. This is all on the California Central Coast where I live, which is now being pummeled with rain. So good timing for bringing me down here to miss that storm. 2 coastal sites, which are really cool. You can see over here, their mean temperatures are very low and mild throughout the summers. And then 2 inland sites, which get really, really darn hot in the summer and a bit colder in the winter, okay? So we had 10 years worth of data from all these sites, and then in 2017, we radio tracked snakes at all 4 sites, and that was a lot of work. Lots of students did that work. And we showed then that those temperature differences translated into snake body temperature differences too. So using the I buttons, we found that the inland sites, these 2 inland sites, Sedgwick Reserve, which is a UC reserve, by the way, and the ranch here, the snakes had higher body temperatures. Makes sense, hotter area, higher body temperature. So they couldn't just thermoregulate perfectly at each one. They did have some trade-offs there. Then what we did was we took those body temperatures and we said, given that they aren't able to ignore the environment and thermoregulate where they are, with climate change, their body temperatures are probably gonna go up. And then we said, well, what's that gonna look like? Now, I'm going to show you this not with their body temperatures, but with something called thermal quality. And let me just explain what that is really quick, because it's a really cool concept. So we can put snakes in a gradient and say what temperatures do they want to be at, and let them thermoregulate. So we have the preferred body temperature. And then we've got the temperatures of the field, like the actual temperatures available in the field. Well, thermal quality means that, high thermal quality means that the field site has temperatures that are really close to where the snakes want to be. Good thermal quality, right? But if it's too cold or too hot in the field, bad thermal quality. And here's what we found with that. Thermal quality, which is shown right here. So this is good, by the way. Perfect thermal quality is where the temperature of the environment matches the temperature the snakes want to be at. It differed based on site, but that's not that important. Here's what I want you to see. Thermal quality goes up when we increase the climate. We used the current projections for temperature increase due to climate change over the next 50 years, a 1-degree increase, a 2-degree increase, and the thermal quality goes up, meaning the temperatures are going to get closer to where the snakes want to be. There's too much time right now that's cold. This is going to lead to snakes having a longer active season, waking up earlier, staying out longer, eating more, having more babies. This is why they're going to do well with climate change, okay? And so as we continued this study, I said, Haley, this is important stuff. My student, let's do a press release. Oh boy, we got a lot of press, even on as much as Newsweek, right? Now, of course, that's not what we said in the paper. But it's true. It's going to be complicated, but it's true in some places that rattlesnakes populations could explode. Okay. So I just want to continue. I want to tell you the fun part now about this, about the energy budgets and climate change that came from this. So the fun thing about this, I'm going to show you an equation, but you don't have to worry about the equation. I'm just going to show you the 2 things that go into it. The metabolic rate of a snake is basically how much energy it uses. So if you know its metabolic rate over a year, you know how much food it needs, which is an important thing when we're studying how these animals are doing with climate change. Many of you probably know that rattlesnakes are low energy specialists. They don't have to eat very much. But how much do they have to eat? Well, we had the 2 pieces of data that you need to figure this out. We realized we had it for the past 10 years. So here's what it is. Again, blah, 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 blah. Standard metabolic rate, don't worry about that. The 2 things you plug into this known equation is the snake's mass, which of course we weigh the snakes, and the body temperatures, which we had day and night for 10 years. So plug, 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 and chug, and you get the standard metabolic rate of the snakes. And we know that on the central coast of California, these are, and I'm sorry it's so jerky, but these are the favorite food of the rattlesnakes. California ground squirrels, which have such an interesting relationship, that could be a seminar on its own. The adult ground squirrels are often resistant to the rattlesnake's venom, but as you can tell, not always. And these snakes are really lucky when they get a meal like this, because it's a lot of calories for them. So we wanted to calculate how many of these snakes would need for the year. So here is what this figure is going to look like. You guys are like, don't go ahead, we want to keep watching that. So these are just the different field sites because the snakes had different temperatures, but overall we're going to see, and we're going to look at the number of ground squirrels per year. Now remember, this is a 3-foot adult male rattlesnake. How many adult ground squirrels does it need to eat to not lose weight? I bet this crowd is, you all are like science folks, nature lovers, you're probably going to know. You're probably going to get it right. Yell out some numbers for me. 50. 12, 2. 6, 30. Has anybody watched The Price is Right? $1? Less than 1. I love this figure, by the way. I think it's so cute. Haley's committee tried to say, don't do that, but I said, no, we're doing it. So at these 2 sites, the inland sites, they have to eat a little more because they're warmer. But like less than 1 adult ground squirrel is all they need. Half of a ground squirrel, y'all. That's amazing. That's all they need. Now, of course, the females need to eat more to have babies and so on, and they will eat more. But this is another piece in the puzzle of why rattlesnakes are so resilient in the face of climate change. If their prey are not very available, the rattlesnakes are like, hey, we're fine. We're just going to hang out in this burrow and wait until they pop back up again. So a double whammy for why rattlesnakes are going to do so well. So by the way, in case anyone's wondering how many calories this really means, right? We had to figure this out. That was fun, another story. An adult ground squirrel is about 690 calories, which is about half of a Chipotle burrito. A whole year. So compare this to another top predator in California, the mountain lions. They need 4,000 calories a day, or 1.5 million calories in a year. A little rattlesnake, about 500 calories in a whole year. Rattlesnakes are amazing, absolutely amazing for what they do. So y'all can tell that I have deep respect, even something bordering on, well, certainly admiration and love for these animals. And so a lot of what we do now is taking what we know and love and really trying to, not just in talks like this, but in other ways, in people who are not choosing to come and listen to a talk on rattlesnakes, to share the love for them, and you're going to hear why. And I'm not just going to tell you about outreach, I'm going to tell you more about research we're doing, because we're trying to specifically do research into this. So I'm going to tell some more fun stories. And these stories are going to involve an endeavor that I co-founded in 2021 that I am obsessed with. I literally dream about it at night. It's called Project Rattlecam. And as you're going to see, we are doing things to very explicitly show rattlesnakes in a positive light, including this mama rattlesnake cuddling her babies, the Project Rattlecam logo. But in fact, that is what mother rattlesnakes do. Mother rattlesnakes care for their babies. The babies like to hang out with them, and they choose to hang out together and show signs of stress when separated. So how do we study these, and how do we use technology, leverage technology that was not available when I was a graduate student to do this? Well, I'm going to tell you a story of prairie rattlesnakes in Colorado, where I work now. My colleague asked me to come join him at the site, and I said, oh, shucks, okay. What you're looking at is outside of Steamboat Springs, Colorado, in extreme high elevation. So this is 8,000 feet elevation, where the rattlesnakes have a very, very short active season. This is a view from a peak and down to another area. That right there is a rattlesnake mega den, which may have been a term before. Like, I like to think I thought of it myself, but I might have heard it somewhere, but I thought it myself, okay. And it's a mega den because it contains lots of snakes. I'm gonna tell you how many later. And the den means that it's a hibernaculum. They come together in the winter and they go down. It's a volcanic peak. They can get down in all those fissures and little lava tubes and get down below the frost line, because this site is under 5 feet of snow at least for like 7 months out of the year. We're talking very high elevation. And then in the spring, when it warms up a little bit, the snakes will all come out and they'll sit around. Oh, don't worry, you're gonna see lots of photos. They'll sit around in the front in big piles of snakes, and they'll bask during the day, and then they go back down at night. So for about a month, they're out there in front of the site. And then in early June, it's like, boom, early June, everybody goes whoosh into the surrounding prairies for miles and miles around, everybody except the pregnant females who stay on the hill. So the adult male rattlesnakes go down to and are eating squirrels and stuff. The female rattlesnakes who are not pregnant that year, because it usually takes them a couple years before they can get pregnant again, because they have to get enough fat to get pregnant again, they go down the hill. But the pregnant females stay. And I say pregnant because rattlesnakes give live birth. So when they wake up from hibernation in June, they had mated the year before, they stored the sperm, they've ovulated during the winter, the whole thing, they're ready to go. They're pregnant when they come up. And so we studied them using radio telemetry. So this is me getting ready to surgically implant a radio transmitter into these snakes. We put eye buttons in them and so on, but I'm not really going to talk about that stuff today. I'm going to talk more about the other things that we did. I did want to mention some technology though. That's so cool. This is some external radio transmitters that we started to test. So new technology. This one has a GPS transmitter on it. So y'all hear about, like, you can put a GPS collar on a big animal, but the miniaturization over time is finally making this possible for something still not, you know, small enough to put on a small rattlesnake, but on a big male like this. And if it's above ground, once per day, that thing pings the satellite. So we don't even have to be there to track it. We can just get the data later about what it's doing. But I digress. We radio track these snakes all around during the year. And what I'm going to be talking about, though, instead of the thermal ecology study, is mainly the other thing that we did, because we have the technology. We put cameras on these snakes' communal rookeries. So a rookery is when the females come up and the males and everybody else are gone, the females all bask together out in front of these little crevices. They named it a rookery, I think, because birds sometimes nest together communally, and rooks are a type of bird that do that. So in some places, including down here, female rattlesnakes just go underground by themselves in a squirrel burrow to give birth, or in a rock crevice. But there, they're all together. And so we put cameras, and these are time-lapse Reconyx cameras. So these are kind of the top of the line, really good ones. Takes a time-lapse image every 5 minutes. One going this way, one going that way. The snakes go down at night and hide deep inside these rocks, and they come out and bask during the day. This, by the way, is a model of a snake that has an eye button in it that's collecting the temperature that a snake could be, so we can do thermal quality studies. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. So you'll see there's no snakes in this picture because the snakes are so funny in Colorado. You walk up there and they all literally are like, ah! And they dive down, and there's one hole and it's a log jam, and they're all trying to get down there. And then as soon as you leave, they come out and they're like, oh, are they gone? I mean, this is not what you see on TV, am I right? There's nobody sitting there trying to strike at you. They're just like, please leave me alone. But with the cameras, we can spy on them when they're not there. So if you get a picture just a few minutes after we leave, this is what you see. Oops, sorry about that. Go back. So you can see there's that model that I was showing you, tons of fat pregnant female rattlesnakes. And as you might be thinking is, oh, pretty soon they're going to give birth and we're going to get to see the babies. And we're going to get to see the social behavior with babies. This is the point. So we went at the end of the year and we downloaded these and we went, oh God, because there's tens of thousands of images. We're like, how are we going to study this, right? What are we going to do? So this cool new technology is a little bit of a double-edged sword because now what am I going to do? Sit and just go through tens of thousands of photos? Well, luckily, there's yet another type of technology that we had access to. And this is a citizen science crowdsourcing technology called Zooniverse. And if you've never heard of it, you all should go check it out immediately. Project RattleCam is no longer active right now on there, but there's a ton of other cool things that are. And what you do is you make a free account, and then you get to help scientists collect data. Maybe it's from images of snakes or something, or maybe it's studying black holes. Maybe it's looking at biofilms from microbiology, but whatever it is, it's there. And this is not easy to do. This project was very, 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 very advanced to build this. It took us about 6 months to build it. And so Zooniverse is by far the biggest platform for community science or citizen science. So there's over, I think there's now maybe 2 million registered users. And the users learn what to do with a combination of like field guides, tutorials, things that the scientists build, which I'm going to show you a little bit about. And so to give you an idea about how important this is, if it was just me, right, if I was the only one, here's me catching a snake. If I was the only one who was able to look at these images, if I was to sit down my laptop, and if I was to work for 40 hours a week on these images, saying, is there snakes there? What are they doing? For 50 weeks a year, 2-week vacation, I think that sounds reasonable. That's about 2,000 hours per year. Zooniverse, basically, I have access to, I'm sorry, I'm going so slow, there's a little bit of a delay. 500,000 hours per year available to me at the drop of a dime, okay? So it's like this for me. This is like Emily on multiplying, right? I multiplied my effort by having it on Zooniverse. Because what the interface looks like is people register and up pops a picture from our site. I must have some big videos coming up because it's slowed down a little bit. Up pops some pictures from our site, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. But I just want you to remember too that this whole thing, we're like, oh, people can help us. That's not the only reason to do it. People are helping us, and they're seeing rattlesnakes doing what rattlesnakes actually do. They're seeing mother rattlesnakes taking care of babies. They're seeing rattlesnakes curled up and basking, not striking people. They're not seeing this, that's for sure. Okay? So we are combating the Animal Planet effect by showing people rattlesnakes up close and personal who might not actually be able to see them up close and personal. Now, anyone who's ever met a rattlesnake at an outreach event knows that seeing a rattlesnake up close is the best possible way to see how amazing they are. So we're constantly doing outreach things like this where people can see the snakes, but we're bringing the snakes to the people, right? We're showing the kids, which is great, but we're not seeing them in the wild, right? We're not seeing them behaving naturally. And sometimes in these cases, the snakes are scared. What if you could bring them to the wild, right? And so when I got those images down, I told my undergraduate mentor, Dr. Harry Green, I told him about it, and he said this to me, and this was one of the most formative things he'd ever said to me. It was an email. He said, my own experience says over and over and over, you get people out there, show them wild rattlesnakes doing their thing, and it blows their minds. If you can see them doing it. And so I had this epiphany. I was walking my dog, I remember it. I remember the road we were on. I said, oh my gosh, if we get them out there, we can't actually get them out there, but we can virtually get them out there through the RattleCam. Also, most people know that you didn't want to really get them out there because unfortunately, if you take people to your field site, they'll tell somebody else, and then somebody will come and trash it. But we don't have to worry about that here because, and here comes a video that might be a little jerky, our site is inaccessible. So I want you to watch this drone footage of my colleague catching a rattlesnake. That's a rattlesnake he's catching right there. You see it flopping around. And in just a minute, the drone is going to zoom out and you're going to see what we have to do to get to where the snakes are. And every year I'm like, all right, can I do this again? So maybe 5 or 10%, here we go, of the world's population could even get there anyway. Look at that. Oh yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay. So if people can't get there, let's bring it to them. All right, so here is what the Zooniverse interface looks like. Helps scientists understand rattlesnake behavior. They can get started. This was built over a 6-month period by scientists, students from 3 different universities, had to put together all this materials. It was totally cool. And what happens to start is a picture pops up and there's a workflow that begins. It starts with, is there 1 or more rattlesnakes present in the image? And if it's yes, then it goes on to how many and so on. And it can be difficult because the snakes are all mishmashed together. So each image is independently coded by 10 different users so that we've got this data set. We asked things about, is there a baby? Colored rattles. So the rattle color, we caught over 500 snakes at this site. There's more than that. And injected unique colors in their rattles as codes so we could tell who they were on camera. Is there any other animals in there? Is there a predator? We had a field guide so they could figure out what it was. We asked if it was raining because, as you're going to see pretty soon, we're interested in how they drink rainwater, and so on and so on and so forth. And here's an example of what it would look like. So here's a picture. They're asking yes, no, and then on it goes. There's the rattlesnake, there's the color, and people can zoom in and et cetera. There's also a talk chat function, so they could just chat with the scientists. Here's a picture of 2 pregnant snakes with colors that are recognizable. It tells the temperature and everything. And these photos were taken every 5 minutes from 2 different points of view at 3 different rookeries all summer long. We had a freak snowstorm in September. And so immediately we learned something. Guess what? Well, most rattlesnakes don't like snow, but not what you'd think. So it was -1 degree Celsius. And uh-oh, look, who's that? Baby rattlesnake, curled up on the surface. Zooming in. I'm so sorry, it's delaying. There it is. There he is. Baby rattlesnake curled up on the surface in sub-freezing weather. That was a discovery. No one knew that had happened before. So the data and how amazing this was that it worked. We had from 8th through June through 1st of October, 60,000 images that we submitted. This is the important part, okay? Retirement limit was 10, meaning that 10 people had to look at it. And instead of it taking me years to do, it took, drum roll, 267 days for over 6,000 individual people to code these. It was one of the most popular Zooniverse projects ever put on Zooniverse platform because people love snakes and because we got it, as you'll see soon, into a lot of classrooms for students to do. So here's a couple quick research questions. I'm just going to throw at you a few things that we learned using these cameras. First of all, how many snakes are there is what we wanted to know. So we were able to combine a mark recapture study where we pit tagged them, which is a way which are basically the same tags that you put inside your cat or dog in case they get lost, with the colored rattles, and go out and catch them. And we were like, okay, we've caught over 500 and marked them, but most of them still don't have colors on their rattles. Use some fancy math to figure out how many there are. Here's just a picture of us processing some of the snakes. And there's about 2,000 rattlesnakes at this site, which is about half the size of a tennis court. Heaven. So this is one of the photos, and the users would go on there in it, red, red, purple, easy, right? Tell us who that is. Oh, that's snake number 5. That's what she's doing this day. First time anyone's ever done this. One of the funnest things that we did was learning about how mothers and newborn babies interacted. So here's a mom with her babies. So we knew that rattlesnake mothers took care of babies, but we didn't really know how because we always would walk up and disturb them. We'd never been able to watch them from afar before. And we learned all kinds of fun stuff. We learned, I'm just gonna make these are videos, so I'll make them go all at once. There's some babies coming out in the morning, all kind of cold, getting a little bit warmer. And then do you see the difference here? You see her face? Mom now watching me warily, the babies. So this was not from the camera, this was from me being there and zooming in really far. We also learned that what people previously thought was mom was oftentimes maybe not mom, maybe it's auntie. because pregnant females would take care of other females' babies. Great question. The question is, what is taken care of? So if I approach, the female will start rattling and she will take the loop of her body and scoot the babies into the hole. Yeah, so they rattle as well, which seems to be a vigilance signal that causes the babies to dive down into the hole too. And then one of my most favorite ones of all, how do rattlesnakes get water? So here's some fun trivia for you. These snakes come out in June, the snow is melted, there's no standing water, there's very little rain, and then they go back into hibernation in October. How are they supposed to get water? Well, people say, oh, well, they just get it from the mice that they eat. Turns out that's not enough. Eating a mouse actually is gonna cause the snake to dehydrate a little bit, so they have to drink. Well, they drink rainwater when it does come. As soon as it rains, the snakes all rush out, and look what they do. They basically smush their bodies down and make little bowls, and they drink off of each other. Look at the little baby drinking off of mom. And they all reach over and start slurping water off of each other in the most adorable way. So adorable, in fact, that we had my trusty artist friend make a cartoon for it. Incidentally, this behavior has been shown to happen in rattlesnakes and other vipers, and also in other desert snakes. It has evolved by convergent evolution separate times. It's accompanied by very, very specific properties of the skin that cause the water to bead up and stay instead of running off of the snake. So these are adaptations on a behavioral and physical level. Okay, what eats the rattlesnakes? We got all kinds of fun predation stuff on there, right? So, and then of course, you know, I can respect these animals that come and eat from this smorgasbord of snakes. There's a red-tailed hawk that came down and got a big rattlesnake. People would find these photos and then they would go to a field guide that my students built with all the known animals there that they could find to do it. In some cases, we were able to make time-lapse movies of predation. Magpies were a hardcore eater of rattlesnake babies. They came and had their way with these baby rattlesnakes. So this is just a quick time lapse. Watch it, just grabbing it, throwing it around, smashing it. See the baby just flying through the air? So they would smash them against the rocks. Lots of baby rattlesnakes getting eaten by magpies. Okay, so to summarize this section, 6,327 volunteers, people who ordinarily would not have been looking at rattlesnakes, doing what rattlesnakes do, did all of this data. But it wasn't just that. There was a chat online that was super popular. Look at this, the notes board. So many comments, so many different participants, so many discussions, people talking about rattlesnakes with me and with the other scientists. And so, I mean, I think that we decided that we wanted to get this to go even possibly a little bit further beyond the community scientists. We thought, what about kids? How can we get kids involved? So we made teacher materials where we had customizable Microsoft Word documents that someone could take and they could customize it. And this was during the pandemic, so it was really good to have when we're doing distance learning. People could make lab exercises for their high schoolers, middle schoolers. And then we really hit the social media hard on it too, showing people what they do, and people responded. This person took a quick break to count rattlesnakes for rattle cams, and they spent non-zero minutes cooing over the babies gallery. So people talked about this a lot on Twitter. And now, because we can't stop, I'm excited to tell you all something that I've never told anyone yet, which we are working on an app, which will be available for download on a free app for computers and cell devices, where it's an interface with all of our data where people can go and they can visualize the data. Teachers, researchers can ask questions, answer questions. So this one, for example, is showing the days when the people said that it rained versus when the snakes were rain harvesting or drinking. And we can see that there's quite a perfect overlap there. And this is all interactive. So you can just click on one of these and the relevant photo pops up. You can look down here about the congruence between rain and rain harvesting. We also can do it with snake count. So this is a way that somebody could just design their own study and use it. Okay, So the second to last thing I want to talk to you about today, because I'm going to talk about roundups, is what's even better than time-lapse images. And I think you all know, right? Who's seen a like eagle nest cam or a falcon nest cam? Those are fun, right? Well, we need to have those on rattlesnakes, don't we? No one had ever done it on rattlesnakes before. And what if we could watch mom and baby rattlesnakes interacting in real time on YouTube? That was my dream. And we made it happen through sheer force on my part. This is not easy. The technology here is very, very difficult because these are not Wi-Fi connected. These are in the middle of nowhere. This is streaming. It's very, very difficult. So what you're looking at is a custom-built camera in a camouflage housing here on a rattlesnake rookery on the central coast of California. So this is a really high-performance security camera that has a remote pan-tilt zoom. So I can sit in my office anywhere in the world and I can zoom in, I can look around, I can do whatever I want with it. It streams via cellular, which is a pain. There's a cam streamer app, so it's streaming direct on YouTube, and I'm live chatting with anybody around the world who's watching it. It's solar charged. I'll show you the battery in just a moment. And there's the whole thing is packaged with anti-theft GPS tracking in case someone takes it. This was all built by my engineers at Cal Poly. This is what I was talking about when this is not something you can just buy. This is the amazing folks who make it happen. And so it was a foggy area, and so we have a battery that's big enough to have a 3-day power supply in the event of fog. And what did we find? What did we see? Well, here's a picture that you might see on any given day with me sitting there chit-chatting with people as we watch these snakes in real time. So again, I hope these aren't too jerky, but I'm just going to show you in the interest of time. We're watching, the snakes are basking, and then the first babies pop up, and it's adorable to watch them. So the jerkiness is me moving the camera. So that's not mom, that is another pregnant female. As I told you, we suspected. Now we're seeing for sure. We know which females are which because they have different patterns on themselves. So I'm not standing there, y'all. I'm miles and miles away. This is me looking at it, and the snakes don't even know. She's still got her fetuses in there. You can tell by her posture. And look, the babies want to be with the moms. It's utterly fascinating. They go and they curl up with them. The pregnant female here doesn't seem to mind. Now everybody watch that baby because it's going to do something adorable. This past year, before we got the big rains, this past September, we got a rare storm, and this one beelined out, and everybody watch her closely. She's drinking the rain off of her back. You can see her cheeks, chubby cheeks going out. So she's chugging the water droplets, and pretty soon I'm going to speed it up, so it's going to go. You're going to watch how she just goes to make circles around her body to drink all this water. Look at her cheeks now as I speed it up. You can really see how she's getting probably the first water that she's had in over a year. And she's pregnant. She gave birth to 2 babies that we know of, at least later on. And again, this was all done on a live streaming camera. Some of you in the audience I know were on there with me on social media because I was freaking out when it happened. It was so fun. Kids were watching this live in their classrooms, and they didn't want to go to recess. They wanted to watch the babies. I got a small grant to put a large screen TV in the Science Center at Cal Poly so students walking by or sitting in the lounge could sit and watch the rattlesnakes. Here it was. That was funded by the Cal Poly Center for Expressive Technologies. Again, I want this live stream at museums and other schools and zoos. And the point of all this is that seeing snakes being snakes made people like them more. All these people who said that they were privileged to witness something extraordinary. It was moving to see the relationships of the babies to the mom. It also helped people who didn't like snakes. Like this person had occasional interaction with snakes. She became enamored with the snake den. And then they were shattered when the camera came down for the year. It was a lovely ritual learning the habits and personalities of our snake neighbors. So right now, what we are doing is we are finishing up the Zooniverse project, finishing the app. We are working on placing a live streaming camera at the Colorado Mega Den because the one I showed you before had a few snakes because it was nearby. If it went down, I could go and fix it. I had to do it for a few years to figure it out. Next summer in 2024, we want to put one up and watch thousands of snakes. How cool would that be? We want to actually study the impact that this has on people. Instead of anecdotes on Twitter, we want to do research on how watching those snakes impacts people, including kids in classrooms. And then, of course, let's not forget the science, right? We are collecting the science data on this too, to continue with. But before I finish, I just have another thing to say, which again, we've had some foreshadowing to this, which is, this isn't just me up here being a snake cheerleader. They really need it. In fact, I think probably more than any vertebrate in the United States. And right this moment especially. All is not rosy in the world of rattlesnakes right now. If you're smiling at this and you're seeing this is all cool, well, right now, and sensitive stuff, warning, sensitive stuff coming up. There are thousands of rattlesnakes right now in drums, just piled to the top with the ones on the bottom squished, who've been collected over the past few weeks. They've been gassed using gasoline out of their dens all throughout Texas for the annual Sweetwater Rattlesnake Roundup, which has been happening since 1958. And it begins tomorrow. And it is hosted by the Sweetwater JCs, and they call it an educational festival. They say that they harvest the venom to be used for developing anti-venoms, which is not true. That venom of these sick and distressed snakes would never be used. It would be like us making vaccines in our barns to give to people. It's just not gonna happen. Venoms for anti-venom are collected in a controlled way from captive snakes. And then they, I'm sorry to say this, but it's true, it's important to know it's true, is they cut off their heads and skin them alive while their heads just sit there gasping for air for hours because their brains don't die for hours because of the low oxygen requirements. Here's some gory images coming up, disturbing. They really make this a family-friendly event and let the kids skin the snakes. The whole economy of the town of Sweetwater is based on this roundup every year, and there's just so much gaslighting going on at this thing, I cannot even tell you how much. There's our wall of shame that we saw before. So it's really hard to do something about it because they go to the state capitol, they lobby the senators, rattlesnakes have a bad reputation, especially in Texas. And for a long time, I just said, well, what can we do? And then this year especially, I said, well, you know what, let's try to do something. In our own small way, something to change the tide over time. Because guess what? It has been changing. Some rattlesnake roundups have been converted into no-kill festivals. So all throughout Georgia and Pennsylvania, what used to be rattlesnake roundups, now people come and they see rattlesnakes and other wildlife, but they're not killing the snakes. And just as many people came as before. It's still the same economic boost to the city. So in the same way that I've been doing all these projects where I'm really trying to use this message framing, right? It's the same things that advertisers use, is to try to meet people on their values. Trying to show rattlesnake moms is something that can move people. A couple years ago, I started a project at my school called Team Rattlesnake Rebrand, and it's an honors class at Cal Poly. And this is the product of part of last year's, that's Buzz the rattlesnake with his buck fangs. I think it's pretty adorable. And we have a lot of different things that we do, but this year, my students at Cal Poly, there's 14 of them. They're not scientists, they're architecture majors, they're journalist majors. They were learning basically the art of argumentation and activism as applied to rattlesnakes, but of course they can then take their skills to anything that's important to them in their lives. And they organized a kids letter writing campaign to the residents of Sweetwater, Texas. So this is my students who are packing up boxes of supplies. All the supplies, including postage, and we purchased Sweetwater addresses, was all sponsored by Advocates for Snake Preservation, which is a wonderful nonprofit that helps snakes. And my students all figured it all out. They made lesson plans. Here's a movie that they made. It's 1 minute long.
Every March, 25,000 people come to visit the world's largest rattlesnake roundup in Sweetwater, Texas, involving a full-fledged festival with a cook-off, carnival, and flea market. On average, 4,000 pounds of snakes are caught every year for this event, where they are killed to entertain attendees. Locals claim that it hasn't made a difference in the population of snakes, but in reality, rattlesnakes are decreasing in numbers due to these events. Snake hunters also spray gasoline into burrows to drive out the snakes, harming other animals and damaging the environment. This is why we need your help. Some of these roundup events have become no-kill snake festivals instead, but this harmful tradition is still continuing in Sweetwater. We need your help convincing them that these amazing creatures deserve to be celebrated instead.
So my students made that. We made lesson plans with all kinds of stuff. We sent them to, we recruited families, we recruited parents, Girl Scout troop leaders, teachers, and we got 900 letters sent this week to residents of Sweetwater, with there's 10,000 people who live there. It's pretty darn good. And every letter was sealed with a sticker where people could learn more if they want to. So it took them to buzz to this information on rattlesnake roundups that said, why are you getting this letter? And here's what you can do about it if you agree with us. The lesson plans had movies about why snakes play important roles in the environment, how they have social lives and parental care. All of this, by the way, all of this is organized by Advocates for Snake Preservation. They own the site rattlesnakeroundups.com. Not rattlesnakeroundup.net, that's Sweetwater, JC's. Rattlesnakeroundups.com is where it's at here. And importantly, we're not asking them to stop the roundup. We're asking them to stop the slaughter at the roundup. They can still have the festival, but let's make it no kill. Press release went out this past Tuesday. Hundreds of children write to residents of Sweetwater, Texas, supporting a no-kill rattlesnake roundup. I've been talking to reporters from Texas all week. It's very exciting. I'm hoping we're gonna get some good press. We're gonna see. But I thought I would end today by showing you some of the letters that the children wrote. Of course, you all know why we did this. I don't have to mention it. People might listen to kids more than they're gonna listen to me. Here's some kids. A kid actually made a table at a local event where be a rattlesnake hero and got other kids to write letters. People drew pictures of rattlesnakes. Here's Maddie, who did 50 letters herself. Classrooms doing it. We had kids of all ages. We had high school down to 5-year-olds doing it. The snakes keep rat populations down, and that keeps ticks away. That keeps Lyme disease away, so you don't die when you go outside. Kids just have a way, don't they? They have a way with things. This tells all why rattlesnakes are important. They control rodent populations. They have their own families. They feel pain and fear just like dogs and cats. I write to ask you to reconsider attending the roundup this year for the sake of these necessary animals. My name is Amelia, and I'm in 7th grade. Rattlesnakes have families and friends. Killing them could separate them, and the babies could have no one to protect them. Also, you shouldn't have to be afraid of them because they only bite to protect themselves. Finally, if rattlesnakes go extinct, the population of rodents would explode and more diseases would spread. If you're curious to see more of these, because there were hundreds, you can see a gallery at the bottom of this website, rattlesnakeroundups.com. So whenever I'm feeling down about what I know is happening to the rattlesnakes right now, I go and I look through that gallery because it gives me hope. Because hopefully it's not like they're gonna go, whoa, we're gonna stop the roundup right now because of this. But it's a seed that's planted. And also we've planted major seeds in all these kids too. Here was finally a troop of Girl Scouts who made this amazing poster about why rattlesnakes are so important. And they were allowed to hang the poster at the East Bay Vivarium, which is a huge reptile shop in the Bay Area. And look at their faces. They're so excited. This was a quote from one of the kids. It really shocked me to my core. Rattlesnakes are really shy creatures. Their rattle sound is not one of ferociousness, but one of screaming. Kids, man, I'll tell you. So I tweeted this a few days ago. You guys, look, it has 1 million views! 1 million views! I don't have that many followers on Twitter, so this is a big deal for me. If anyone does not on Twitter, that's a lot of people to see. That's a viral post. A lot of people saw this. I'm excited. The project has exceeded my expectations, and I hope it does something. And maybe we'll hear about it now that the roundup is here. Maybe we'll hear in the next few days that it's had an effect on some people. So I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation today. To thank Scott Boback, who's my main collaborator on the Project RattleCam, all my students and volunteers and funding sources. And I wanted to lastly tell you that if you were excited about the concept of having that mega den in Colorado where you can watch it on Project RattleCam, we are doing a fundraiser, and we would welcome if you've had any donations you'd like to do. You can do it there, or if you like stuff, we have it here tonight too. I have a sticker pack and this beautiful snake safe space sign where you can show off that we don't kill snakes. All of the proceeds for this go to our snake conservation efforts for the rattlesnake camera. If you do want any of that stuff, Haley right there, she has those, so you can go see her. But thank you so much for your support and for listening to my talk and for collectively helping, we can all help boost the image of rattlesnakes out there in the wild. So thank you. If you don't have to close that down, you can leave it up for a minute, it would be good. Of course, if you have to leave, feel free, but I would love to answer any questions. Yes?
Regarding the climate resilience, so everybody can hear you. You know I had that question. Can you hear me? Everyone hear me? Regarding the climate resilience of the rattlesnakes, how do you extrapolate out whether the ground squirrels will survive that climate change?
Excellent question, an excellent question. So us snake physiologists, we start being very reductionist, right? It's like, okay, it's just based on temperature. It doesn't even include so many other possible things that could be impacted, could change as well, right? Like, for example, if their prey take a nosedive, that won't be good for the snakes. However, the fact that they can get by on so few means that they're going to be more resilient than other animals. So whereas a lot of other animals are going to just die off, they can at least just sit and kind of wait without even losing much weight until there's more to have. But no, it's so true. To do a true model of what's going to happen, we'd have to know how everything, like the complex web, was going to be impacted, not just the thermal biology. Yeah.
And just one other quick question. What do the babies eat? Like, how do they get fed?
Great question. Okay, so the babies eat mostly lizards, but I'm going to tell you something really cool too that was really fun this summer because we did a big project looking at baby rattlesnakes. So when the babies are born, they have these big pot bellies. Like, they're so cute. And what it is when they're in the mom's oviducts, they have a placenta where they're getting oxygen from the mom and some nutrients, but most of the nutrient is actually in a big yolk sac, and they slowly pull the yolk sac up through their umbilical cord into their bodies. And right before they're born, they take the rest of the yolk and they go whoop, and they pull it in, and then they are born, they have a little belly button there. It's adorable. And then they crawl around for the next couple months with this yolk sac inside their body, big old pot belly, and they're feeding off of the yolk internally. So it's like the mom packed them a lunch to take with them. So they don't have to eat for months, not even, they don't eat until the next year really. But when they do, they mostly are gonna eat lizards to start until they get big enough to eat rodents. There's one back there first.
What is the range of the rattlesnakes? How far out do they go?
Are you talking about the geographic range of rattlesnakes?
From their den?
Oh, a home range?
Where do they live?
How far do they go? Yeah. So the home range, meaning like how big an area they live in, individual rattlesnakes varies dramatically by species and by individuals. But the ones that we study are all pretty similar. The males are pretty similar, the females are pretty similar. So the females are gonna be about the size, really small, about half the size of a football field is their core range. And then the males, really small. They hang out, the females just sit and chill and look for food. And then the males move around looking for the females. So the males are gonna be a much bigger area, several hectares. So, you know, I don't know, the size of this campus that we're on would be a decent male's range. And then from there, he would take little bouts where he might go out of that and come back looking for females. So the males are cruising around quite a bit, especially in the spring and in the late summer looking for females, and the females just sit there and hunt and wait. Yeah, yes, sir.
We have one.
I'll repeat it. Oh, should I go to?
Yeah, because we have a microphone here.
Sorry about that. We'll come to you next.
Just a fabulous presentation. Your enthusiasm is overwhelming.
Thank you.
But what's the life expectancy of a normal rattlesnake?
I'm so glad you asked that. So rattlesnakes that make it through the juvenile stage into adults have a really high survival, and they can easily live into their teens and easily into their 20s and 30s. The oldest known rattlesnake in the wild is still alive as far as we know, and she's in her 60s. Timber rattlesnake in New York. And the only reason we know that is because there's a scientist right now who's in his 70s who started marking snakes when he was a teenager. Yep. Back in the back.
Can you describe the structure of the rattle and how it's evolved over thousands of years to be so efficient at sending out warning? That is to say, leave me alone.
Yes. Oh my gosh, this would be a whole other seminar as well. So I'm going to give you the short answer, and then if you want to talk more, then come talk to me. So first of all, the evolution of the rattle. A lot of people notice that other snakes shake their tails, and they say, oh, they're trying to mimic a rattlesnake. It's actually not true, because it turns out that most snakes shake their tails when they're nervous. And so, including the ancestors of rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes, through natural selection, basically, and they think it had to do with, it's really complicated. They think it had to do with, first, the babies would use the tip of the tail as a caudal lure. They go like this to lure little frogs and little lizards to come because they think it's a worm. So they would lure them in. So that through natural selection caused it to become a little thickened. And then when they shed, pieces of the skin started to stick and stay on. And then that eventually, over time, through natural selection, led to the rattle. So the rattle is made of the same material as your fingernails, keratin, and it's a set of interlocking segments that are made each time a rattlesnake rattles. And so that was all accompanied. Everyone wants to talk about the rattle, but the ability to rattle, which is what you're also asking about, that crazy fast rattle, was accompanied by an evolution of some of the fastest muscle contractions known to animals. So the rattlesnake tail has the second fastest contraction of muscles of any animal, and everybody always wants to know the first one. It's a fish's swim bladder muscles. I don't know. I'm not a fish biologist. So those things together then facilitated this extremely fast contraction that makes that really, really high-pitched noise. So probably started, and there's overwhelming evidence, started as a slight change in the structure of the tail to facilitate catching bug-eating things by tricking them into thinking it's a worm, and then over many millions of years, the rattle. Amazing. Yes, sir.
So I was going to ask about the rattle, and you said it was a scream, not a warning sign to its prey or to someone who's going to attack it. You say it's a scream to prevent someone from attacking it?
Yeah, so, well, that was a 11-year-old middle schooler who said that, and I think that they were saying it to try to say that the snake was scared. That when a snake is rattling, the snake is scared. It's not trying to be ferocious, it's frightened. And I think that's something we all forget, is that the snakes are only gonna rattle when they feel that their life is in danger. But yes, absolutely, it is a mechanism of warning off potential predators. But it's not that simple. Everyone that has, like I always tell people, most things you've heard about rattlesnakes is a myth. There's two myths in here. First, the myth that rattlesnakes rattle to warn you. If you spent time with rattlesnakes, you know they almost never rattle to warn you. It's unfortunate, but it's true. They rely on camouflage. They're not gonna, because the second myth, that they're gonna give, if they rattle, the second myth would be that rattling actually scares away a predator. No. Have you ever seen the videos of bobcats and owls and hawks going after a rattlesnake? If they can hear the rattlesnake rattle, they're like, oh, there's a rattlesnake. And then they'll get it. They fight it and they get it. So if anything, it scares us away, which is good. And I certainly has for me. I've been like, okay, I'm not gonna step on you. Okay, we're good. But I don't think that's why it evolved. Yeah.
And the poison that they have, is that to stun the prey? That was mainly the purpose of the poison that they have in their teeth?
Yeah, the poison is to kill the prey. Yeah, so not just to stun it, but to kill it. So by the time the rattlesnake eats the prey is almost always gonna be dead. So it will kill the prey, and then it starts to kind of tenderize the prey from the inside out as well. Because imagine if you had to eat a 100-pound hamburger all in one bite, and you couldn't chew it, and we would digest it real slowly, right? So by injecting it with some venom first, they're helping with some pre-digestion. Yeah, question right here.
Oh, you talked
I'll repeat it.
Oh, should I get a microphone?
I'll repeat it. You're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. You talked about rattlesnakes wanting to be warmer, and consequently they would do better in a climate that is warming. How does that explain the fact that they use more calories when they're warm than when they're cold?
Really, really great question. That's an excellent question. So there's the idea that rattlesnakes want to be warmer, so they might do better in a climate where they're warm. But they're also going to be expending more energy on their upkeep, right? So therefore, if they don't get enough food, it could be worse for them. And you're totally right, because in fact, the place in Colorado where we do our work, where they only have a 3-month active season because they're under snow the rest of the time, those female rattlesnakes gain weight really fast and give birth every 2 years because they don't spend any calories during the winter, because their body temperature is so low that they're not metabolizing. They don't have to spend energy. It's energy savings. But to answer your question, what our models showed was that in your typical California snake, that it's going to allow them to be active earlier, which actually coincides better with the baby ground squirrel season, at least right now, we'll see, and would theoretically allow them to be able to get more food, in fact, even more food than you would expect otherwise. So these are all, remember, anyone who's a scientist in here knows that these models are educated guesses about what's going to happen in the future. We don't know for sure. That's all we can do with climate change, is say what we think will happen. Most of these thermal ecology studies directly show that the animals are going to just decline because it'll be too hot for them. It's been the opposite for the rattlesnakes, which is really interesting. But it's totally, there's more factors to include for sure. You're absolutely right. Yes, you.
How many babies are born at once?
How many babies are born at once? This varies a lot from species to species. So when we were just in Colorado this summer and we had a bunch of babies give birth, which I can't stand it, I can tell you guys, you're gonna be able to see it on TV on a major network later this year. So follow me on social media, you'll find it. We were able to recreate birthing to make it in the wild, to be able to see what's happening under the ground. It's amazing. So they had between 5 to 13 babies, and the average was 8. And that was prairie rattlesnakes in Colorado. The Southern Pacific rattlesnakes where I study are slightly fewer. The Western Diamondback rattlesnakes, where the roundup is occurring, are more like 20. So it really is highly variable. Yeah.
And how big are they?
How big are they? They're about the size of a pencil. Yeah, a little bit longer than that. So they're maybe about this long and about as big around as your finger. Yeah, variable as well. Yes, sir?
How long does it take to typically digest the ground squirrel?
Yeah. How long does it take to digest a ground squirrel? It depends on the temperature, but usually a couple weeks before they poop out some bone dust and some squirrel fur. Yeah.
How long do the babies stay with the parent? And when they leave, what is the range? Where do they go? How far away?
Such a good question. Okay, so the first part we do know. How long do the babies stay with the parents? Usually it's up to 2 weeks, although we're now realizing it depends. So that's if they're all going to disperse. In Colorado, they stay together for the whole fall. They're born in the summer, and because the den is right there, so they stay together the whole time. In other places, the parents will disperse, and then it's been shown scientifically that the babies use the scent trails of the parents to follow them to the den. So they're only acutely staying with them for a couple weeks, but then they get back together with them later on. And they have these really complicated social lives where rattlesnakes have been shown to hang out preferentially with their family members. And also just with certain individuals, so they have friends. And we saw this in a live cam. There were these two who would sit next to each other, and they always had to touch, 2 pregnant females. And this poor other female would always come out and crawl by, and if she touched them, they would flinch. like Mean Girls. The second part of your question was, yeah, how far they go. I mean, as well, it's just every rattlesnake population is very different. Yeah. Question in the back.
Great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have a question on the huge mega den in Colorado. Are there more? Is that an anomaly, or are there more dens like that with that many snakes. I've not heard of anything like that in California.
Yeah, it's not an anomaly. It's something that happens there because you're at high elevation in a cold area, and there's few places that are thermally appropriate for the snakes. So in California, you don't. I don't know of any that are that big. This is something you see in the plains in the United States. You also see it up in like Canada as well, and even on British Columbia. Excuse me. But in California, we do have dens. And the dens that are at higher elevations, so for example, right up here in the San Jacinto Mountains, at the top of those mountains, there are Southern Pacific rattlesnake dens that have at least many dozens of individuals in them, but not thousands like that, yeah.
So I was wondering, do you know how long it takes for their internal temperature to start to reach the external temperature? Like how rapid does that happen? Like, you know, for its internal body temperature to start to match what's on the outside?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that depends on their body size. So it's very rapid for a baby because they have a high surface area to volume ratio, so they'll heat quickly. And then for a big adult, it's much more slowly. We have those curves because we did a study where we were looking at how the rattlesnake coloration impacts their surface temperature and their internal temperature. And so if you put them out in full solar radiation, how long does it take for like a cool male to warm up? And it's just perfectly proportional to body size. And if a snake goes out into the sun, again, you have to control for solar radiation, but on a typical sunny day, we're talking on the about 30, 35 minutes for a big snake. So pretty quickly. It's worth mentioning that those models, like those pipes that you saw that we have, those are called operative temperature models, which are specifically designed to say what temperature would a snake be if it was sitting in that spot instantaneously at any given moment. And then we have, of course, the snake's actual body temperatures to compare as well, which is really, really cool to look at that. So that thermal inertia is an important issue when you're thinking about acute issues in thermal biology. Yes, sir. I'll repeat it.
I think I've heard that timber rattlers are threatened or endangered. Is that true?
Question is timber rattlesnakes threatened or endangered? Okay. The term threatened or endangered is an official category that is given by either a state or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the timber rattlesnake has neither of those. No rattlesnake has any of those. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake is now being considered for endangered status for the first time, which is very exciting. Not exciting, it sucks, but it's exciting that at least they're looking at it. The timber rattlesnake is up on the northeast and then also down into the south. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake is just in the south. Those animals are experiencing dramatic declines. They got hit really hard with rattlesnake roundups many decades ago. They're mostly illegal now to collect those, but habitat destruction and so on has also hurt them. The reason that they are hurt disproportionately compared to a southern Pacific or a western diamondback is because those species have a very different life history. It takes a long time to reach maturity if you're a timber rattlesnake. Once you give birth, it takes 3 to 6 years to give birth again. So they're kind of life in the slow lane, and any individual that someone kills is going to have a much bigger impact. The western diamondbacks in Sweetwater, I don't like what they're doing with those snakes, but they're never going to make them go extinct because they are just machines at reproducing and growing and making more snake. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
How do you determine a snake's age if you haven't been tracking it from the time it's little?
You can't. Yep, you can't. So you can, I'm pretty good at telling a snake's age if it's young because I've seen so many thousands of rattlesnakes, I can read the rattle. So if a rattle has a taper to it and it has the baby button on it, then I can read and I can estimate within a year if it's about 3 or 4 years old. And that's because when a rattlesnake sheds and it makes its new rattle, the rattle is the width the snake's tail was at the time it rattled. So when you see a tapered rattle, you know that snake is young and it's been growing. But then eventually the rattle breaks off, and eventually an old snake has just parallel rattles. And all I can look at is I can say, that's an old snake. That's all I can say. No. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I need help. Maybe a bunch of us here do. Tomorrow morning, we're all going to be out in our respective communities. We're going to be talking to our friends. We're going to say, I went to a really cool lecture last night.
I'm so glad you're going to say that.
And my friend's going to go, I didn't pick my friend, my friend's going to go, oh, I hate snakes. Well, that's really a conversation stuff. Any tips or techniques?
Yes. I'm glad to repeat it. I'm glad to repeat it. Thank you for reminding me about that. So I think this is a really important question. The question was, tomorrow you're talking to a friend and you say, I saw this really cool talk. Thank you very much. And it's about snakes, and your friend says, I hate snakes. And so your question really is, how do we convince people? How do we change people's minds? Now, I also give talks specifically on that. You may have noticed that it was imbued throughout the lecture, but I never straight out said it. We've done research on that. We've done research on what messages actually change people's minds. And what we have found is, and I want everyone here to remember that people vary, that when I say this, I'm talking about categories broadly of people. We found through actual experimentation that the messaging about the mothers taking care of the babies works especially well for young people and women. The messaging about snakes being very important members of our environment because they eat rodents and the rodents carry diseases, so they do these things for us, works very, very well for older people and for males. Messaging of any kind fails dramatically on most people who identify as being strongly religious. That's complicated though. This is what our data showed. And finally, messaging of positive messaging is far more likely to work the younger the person is. You can see some of these things, right? So over the years, I try to read people and I come up with the best way to do it. I'll talk about different things. But for me, it's a long-term thing. So let me just finish by telling you a brief story about something that I did this morning when, before driving down here, I drove to Monterey County. I had a long day for these snakes. I went to Monterey County to pick up a rattlesnake that was found on a ranch, an olive oil ranch, by a woman who, for the past 3 years, has bantered with me online, telling me about all the snakes she kills. She'd say, well, I know they're good for the environment, but just ranch justice, stay off my property. And she'd send me photos of the heads cut off and all. And the place where they're going to relocate the snakes to that's half a mile away, which is the right space, and pledged not only to do it the whole year, but to get their whole neighborhood doing it too. So it's hard. It's hard. It's something that I'm still working on all the time. But just arguing with someone doesn't do it. You have to just go for the long game. I know, right? Yes, I do. So, we good? We good?
Yeah.
That's a good place to end.
That's a great place to end.
Thank you so much, folks.